Mithrandiel here at PAX West 2017, checking out Tiny Bubbles, member of the esteemed PAX 10. Who am I joined by today?
Stuart Denman. I'm the creator and designer in the game. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Tiny Bubbles for someone who might not be familiar with the title.
Sure, yeah. Tiny Bubbles is a arcade-style puzzle game using the physics of soap bubbles. So it uses surface tension and pressure, and it creates a really interesting gameplay that is really unusual. You're filling bubbles with color, and you have to match at least 4 or more of the same color. And when they touch each other, they deflate. And so the game is a lot of that's the core mechanic of the game. But there's a lot of different strategies that you do. Each of the 160 levels has a unique kind of twist on what you're doing. So you kind of have to think about how to solve the goal of each level, and the goals vary throughout the game. So it's not like you're doing sort of the same game mechanic over and over like a lot of match games. There are creatures in the bubble. There are new moves that I introduce. So there's always like something interesting and new in the game. Yeah.
So it sounds like a very unique concept in terms of soap bubbles and surface tension and things like that. Where did the idea for this game come from?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting story. My grandfather was a scientist. He was a metallurgist. He studied metals, and he also really liked soap bubbles because the structure of the soap bubbles is really similar to what metals look like under a microscope. The grains of metals, and so he was also a metallurgist on the Manhattan Project in the 1940s and 50s when he did some of this research. And when I was a kid growing up in the 1980s, he would always like play around with things in nature that just delighted him. Soap bubbles were one of those things we would play with, and he just had this like infectious enthusiasm for science and nature, and it really rubbed off on me as a kid. I've been a game developer for about 20 years professionally, so I've done a lot of design and coding and other things over the years, but it came around to the time when I was like, I really need to make a game that's my own game, my own design. I've been making games that were other people's designs and stories for a long time, which is great, but I really need to see what I could do on my own. And so they always give you advice if you're an author, writing a book. They say write about what you know. And this was kind of the same way with me. I really looked back and kind of got nostalgic and thought about my grandfather and thought about the science that he did, and I thought, well, soap bubbles have this really interesting behavior. Is there any way that I can make a game out of this? And so I just started playing. I really just started thinking about how I could find a game in this strange world of soap bubbles. And so this is very much me creating the physics engine, which took a couple of months of really hard work, not just to make the bubbles work, but to make it stable and fast enough for a game. Had to be fairly predictable and easy for the player to understand what was going to happen when they did something. So once I had done that, I was able to sort of explore where this new gameplay could go in terms of making levels. And I didn't know what the game was going to be, but I knew what was fun, and I just kind of played, and it ended up being 168 levels. So
yeah, I saw that, and on the main menu, I was just noticing, there's arcade, and there seems to be various modes in the game. Could you tell us a little bit more about those different modes?
Yeah, sure. So the arcade mode works where you're trying to. The moves come sort of randomly. I equate it to Tetris because it has this idea that you can see your future moves. You have a current move, but they come randomly, so you don't know what order is coming, but you can see a little bit ahead and plan. So it works like that, in that your colors come in a random order in the arcade mode. There's also a fish named Bloop. He swims around under the bubbles and he blows new bubbles. So if you were to make, say, 2 moves, he would then make 2 moves and then stop. The way it works is there's a boundary around the outside, and if the bubbles grow too big, these urchins who have very spiky guys, they come and they will pop all your bubbles. So you don't want to let the cluster grow too big. So you're trying to make matches and deflate the bubbles to prevent that from happening. But every level has a slightly different goal. So there's some levels where you're trying to just pop all the bubbles or deflate them to be smaller. Others where you're trying to bring creatures together who are stuck inside the bubbles. There's other ones where there's bad guys. There's a guy called the Jelly Crab, and if his bubble gets next to one of the stars, he'll chase after a star, and then you have to retry it. It's game over, right? The other part of the game is what I call the puzzles. So half the worlds in the game are puzzle and half are arcade. The way the puzzles work is you have the moves come in the same order every time. You have a certain number of moves every time, so like maybe 3 or 4 or 5, something like that. And then there's usually only one solution. So it's kind of the gameplay there is more like you look at this puzzle in front of you. You try and figure out what the solution is. So you're trying out different things, and there's no penalty for retrying. So it's just kind of this these like brain stumpers almost. So some people like the random Tetris style stuff. Other people like the stumpers.
Yeah.
I like both personally, which is why I did both. But
so what was the most challenging aspect when it came to developing this game? I know you mentioned you spent a lot of time on the physics engine. Was there a particular element of the physics engine that was a particular obstacle, like the way that they condense on one another, or anything like that?
Yeah, the physics engine was definitely a challenge. I mean, it took me 2 months. It's one of those things that isn't really isn't like you can't just Google it. There's a few academic researchers that have tried to do it, and they definitely have solutions. There was a 150-page PhD thesis on how to do this. It's called 2D dry foam simulation. I implemented that thesis actually, and it.
Did you reach out to the person who wrote that and say thank you?
He didn't reply. So I implemented that, but it doesn't work. It works for very certain cases. The solver for that is very expensive. It wouldn't work at 60 frames on an iPhone 5 like I've got now. And it was unstable. So in fact, the most unstable case for it was only 2 bubbles. It couldn't figure that out. So it would just explode to infinity. For games, if something works 99.9% of the time, it's not good enough. It has to work 100% of the time. And so I had to throw that out completely, which is sad because it took me a week to learn the math to do that solution. I had to teach myself nonlinear Jacobian matrices, which is this math that just blows my mind even now.
It sounds intimidating.
It is highly intimidating, yeah. So I had to come up with my own solution, and I kind of just stepped out of my house and just took a deep breath, and I said, what does nature do? And I just thought about what the molecules of soap were doing. I read about how surface tension works and everything. And yeah, I just figured out how to simulate the actual molecules of soap.
Was it like that moment in Iron Man when Tony Stark's like, I invented a new element? Is that what it kind of felt like when you finally cracked the code? Or?
Yeah, I don't know, not exactly, but it felt. It's kind of like when I figured it out, I kind of just knew it would work.
Yeah.
In a weird way. I don't know how. It was a simple and elegant solution as opposed to this complex like academic mathematical solvers. It wasn't as much a math solution as it was just kind of an intuitive solution. And it was optimized for games. So it's not a perfect simulation of bubbles, but it's very fast and good enough, like really good enough. Does that answer your question? Some of the other hard things in the game was definitely getting like the tutorial right. There's so many new things that you're doing in this game. Like I call them game mechanics, but there's so many new things that you're doing that I really had trouble teaching the player all of these new things because there's a lot of color matching games out there, and I'm doing some things that are not quite the same as them, but that are really fun in the physics of the bubbles.
Right.
So I have to kind of unlearn some things for the player, and doing that's a challenge. So I've been going to a lot of local game shows and showing the game off and getting feedback from real players, not just game developers. I've been showing it to just like families that'll walk through free open indie game shows and play, and you get just regular people playing the game, and you get to see what they struggle with and what they understand and don't, and it helps you kind of perfect that teaching that you have to do at the beginning of every new game like this, where it's not something they've seen before, maybe.
Right. Yeah. Definitely mastering the tutorial, especially I've played through all of the PAX 10 now at this point, and it's interesting how that conveyance, like kind of teaching the player how to get through the game, is approached differently by different people. So definitely a good thing to nail down, because if a player doesn't understand why certain actions do what they do, then they're going to be completely turned off.
Yeah, they'll just put the phone down or
download another free game or whatever.
Yeah,
move on. So last question, Tiny Bubbles, what phase are we in? When can we expect this title out? And is it strictly going to be on mobile, or will there be other platforms that we can look forward to it coming out on?
Good question. So it's going to be out on mobile, so iOS and Android. It works great on phones as well as bigger screens. It's also going to be available on PC and Mac, Steam, and then as many stores like can get it on, like Humble Bundle, itch.io, that kind of thing. It plays just as good with mouse keyboard as it does with touch. I mean, touch is awesome because you can tap on a bubble and it bloop, it reacts right under your fingers, and it's just something really delightful about that.
Feels better than like pointing and clicking.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I like it on PC just as well, but yeah, I mean, sure. Consoles is something I'm definitely looking at, especially like Switch with the touchscreen. But that's going to be like after I launch. I'm also going to do a 2-player mode after I launch as well, which is going to be like a local pass and play. The way that'll play, if you want to know more about that, is each player will have a set of moves that'll be secret to them, and that you play in the same soap foam, like you're filling bubbles in the same way, but you don't know what moves I have, and I don't know what moves you have, and we're all trying to make matches. So, for example, if let's say I have two yellow bubbles and I place another yellow bubble next to that, you might be like, oh, he's trying to make a 4-of-a-kind match, right? So, but you don't know if I have a yellow coming up or not, and you don't know when I might place that yellow. So, but maybe you decide, oh, I think he's going to do it. So you take your blue color and you fill one of my yellows and turn it to green. Now all of a sudden you've thwarted my plans, right? But then you're giving up the chance for you to make a match, right? So it's this kind of like interesting, like almost like poker, like trying to figure out what hand you have, but with in the environment of the soap bubbles, which is kind of different. So yeah, I want to do that after launch also, and
launch is going to be.
Good question. So I don't know exact date, but it's a couple months out. So I'm just finishing up some last minute things like achievements and getting it on different languages, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm close.
Well, Stu, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today about Tiny Bubbles. It's been a real blast to check out, and I'm going to dive into the demo right now, see how it plays, and share my thoughts. So thank you so much.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks for checking it out.